The kid's hand shot out and grabbed the soldier's rifle strap. Right there, in front of Buckingham Palace, in front of 40 tourists with their phones already recording, a young man with Down syndrome had just made physical contact with one of the most disciplined military figures on the planet. And what happened in the next 90 seconds would become London legend, a story whispered about for decades, shared millions of times across the internet, debated in pubs and living rooms and military forums around the world. Because nobody, and I mean nobody, could have predicted what that soldier did next. But let me back up just a little, just enough so you understand why this moment cracked the internet wide open. His name was Andrew, 22 years old, brown hair, big glasses, a gap-toothed grin that could light up a cathedral. He'd flown from Manchester to London with his mom, Patricia, a retired school nurse who'd saved for 14 months to give her son the trip of a lifetime. Andrew had one obsession, one thing he talked about every single day, one dream that burned so bright his mom couldn't ignore it anymore. He wanted to see the Queen's Guard, not on television, not in a book. He wanted to stand in front of one of those soldiers in the tall black bearskin hats and the red tunics, close enough to touch, close enough to see if they were real. Now here's what nobody tells you about the Queen's Guard. They aren't actors. They aren't mannequins planted there for tourist photos. These are serving soldiers from some of the most elite regiments in the British Army. The Grenadier Guards, the Coldstream Guards, the Irish Guards. These men and women have done tours in Afghanistan, Iraq, Bosnia. They've carried coffins of fallen comrades. They've been shot at. And when they stand outside Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle, they are on active military duty. That rifle isn't decorative, it's loaded. The bayonet is real. And the rules of engagement are crystal clear. If anyone is perceived as a threat, if anyone crosses the line, these soldiers are authorized to respond with force. They can shout, they can stamp, they can level that bayonet directly at your chest. And if they need to, they can use it. Most people don't know that. Most tourists treat these soldiers like props. They dance next to them, they make faces, they try to get a reaction. And 99% of the time, the soldier stares straight ahead, jaw locked, eyes fixed on a point in the distance, and gives them absolutely nothing. But Andrew wasn't trying to get a reaction. Believe me, that kid didn't have a strategic bone in his body. He wasn't performing for a camera. He wasn't trying to go viral. Andrew just loved soldiers. He had toy soldiers lined up on his bedroom windowsill back in Manchester. He watched the changing of the guard on YouTube every night before bed. He knew the names of the regiments. He knew the difference between the bearskin hats based on the plume color and spacing of the buttons. He knew more about these soldiers than most British citizens, and he talked about them with the kind of pure, unfiltered admiration that you almost never see in adults. Patricia knew her son. She knew what he was capable of when he got excited. And she was nervous. She'd been nervous since they got on the train at Piccadilly Station that morning, Andrew bouncing in his seat, pressing his face against the window, counting down the stops. She'd rehearsed the rules with him a dozen times. You can look, you can take a picture, but you cannot touch. You cannot get too close. These are real soldiers, Andrew, and they have a job to do. Andrew had nodded each time. He understood. He always understood the rules. Following them was a different story. They arrived at Buckingham Palace around 11 in the morning. The crowd was thick. Summer tourists, school groups, families with strollers, a couple of street performers near the Victoria Memorial. Patricia held Andrew's hand and navigated through the crowd toward the guard posts. And then Andrew saw him. The soldier was standing in the sentry box to the left of the main gate. Tall, rigid, the bearskin hat adding another 18 inches to his already imposing frame. Red tunic buttoned tight, black trousers with a razor-sharp crease, white gloves, and the rifle held at the precise angle dictated by centuries of military protocol. The soldier's face was blank, not bored, not hostile, just empty. The practiced neutral expression of a man trained to show nothing for hours at a time. Andrew stopped walking. His hand went slack in his mother's grip, his mouth fell open, and he whispered one word, real. Patricia felt the change in him instantly. The trembling started in his hands and moved up through his shoulders. His breathing got fast. She squeezed his hand tighter and said, "Remember the rules, love?" Andrew didn't respond. His eyes were locked on the soldier. He started walking forward. Now get this. The distance between Andrew and the soldier was about 15 feet. There was a low chain barrier, The kind you could step over without breaking stride. No fence, no wall. Just a chain about knee height connected by short posts with a small sign that read, "Do not cross." Most tourists respected it, some didn't. And when they didn't, the soldiers responded with what the military calls a challenge. That's the shout you've probably seen in videos. The soldier stamps forward, snaps the rifle to port arms, and bellows something like "Stand back from the Queen's Guard." It's sudden, it's loud, it's designed to shock, and it works. Grown men have stumbled backward and nearly fallen over. Andrew was 10 feet away. Patricia was right behind him, one hand on his shoulder, trying to slow him down without causing a scene. She could feel the eyes of other tourists turning toward them. A few phones came up. Someone nudged their friend and pointed. 8 feet. Andrew was saying something under his breath. Patricia leaned in and caught it. He was reciting the regiments. Grenadier Guards, Coldstream Guards, Scots Guards, Irish Guards, Welsh Guards, over and over like a prayer. 5 feet. They were at the chain. Patricia planted her feet and pulled gently on Andrew's arm. "This is close enough, love. We can see him perfectly from here." Andrew looked at her. And here's the thing about Andrew. His face hid nothing. Every emotion he felt played across his features in real time. Right now, what Patricia saw was need. Not want, need. The way a person needs air, he needed to be closer. "Mom," he said, "I just want to say hello." Patricia's throat tightened. She looked at the soldier. He hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, hadn't acknowledged their existence in any way. She looked at the other tourists. A woman with a German accent was filming them. 2 teenage boys were smirking. An older man shook his head slowly, like he already knew what was about to happen. "One step," Patricia said. "One step closer. But you do not touch him. Do you understand me, Andrew?" Andrew nodded so fast his glasses slipped down his nose. He pushed them back up, took a breath, and stepped over the chain. "I swear this happened exactly the way I'm about to tell you." Andrew took 1 step past the barrier, then 2, then 3. Patricia's hand slid off his shoulder. She lurched forward, 1 foot tangling in the chain, nearly going down. By the time she caught her balance, Andrew was already within arm's reach of the soldier. The soldier's eyes moved. Just the eyes. A flicker to the right, registering Andrew. Then back to center. His jaw tightened. You could see the tendons in his neck shift. His thumb adjusted on the rifle stock. The training was kicking in. This was a breach. Someone had entered his zone. Protocol demanded a response. Andrew didn't notice any of it. He was staring up at the bearskin hat with absolute wonder, his head tilted back, his mouth hanging open. And then he did the thing that stopped 40 hearts simultaneously. He reached out and grabbed the leather strap of the soldier's rifle. Patricia screamed. Not a word, just a sound. A mother's reflex, pure fear compressed into a single syllable. She lunged forward, but a man in the crowd caught her arm, thinking she was falling. By the time she pulled free, it was too late to intervene. The soldier's body went rigid. Every muscle locked. His chin dropped an inch, his eyes fixed on Andrew's hand wrapped around the strap. His left foot shifted backward, the sole of his boot scraping the stone. This was the moment. This was the razor's edge. Training said stamp, shout, challenge, remove the threat. Months of drill instruction, years of military discipline, the weight of tradition going back centuries, all of it pointed toward one response. Intimidate, neutralize, restore order. And if you've seen those viral videos, you know what usually happens. A tourist gets too close, and the soldier becomes a weapon of sound and fury, bellowing at maximum volume, the rifle snapping into position. People cry, people freeze, people run. It's effective, and it's terrifying, and it's exactly what this soldier was trained to do. But this soldier did something else entirely. He looked down at Andrew, really looked at him, saw the big glasses, the gap-toothed grin that was somehow still there despite the chaos erupting around him, the trembling hands, the pure, radiant, uncontainable joy in the kid's eyes. And the soldier made a decision in that moment that would cost him everything or define him forever. He didn't shout. He didn't stamp. He didn't raise his rifle. No, listen to me. What he did was so far outside protocol that senior officers would be reviewing footage of this moment for days afterward. What he did broke nearly every rule in the manual, violated centuries of tradition, and risked his career in the space of a single heartbeat. He smiled. Not a big smile, not a grin, just a softening at the corners of his mouth, a warmth that crept into his eyes, and a barely perceptible nod. An acknowledgement, human to human, Soldier to citizen, man to boy. Andrew's hand was still on the strap. The soldier looked down at it. Then, slowly, with a gentleness that seemed impossible given the rigidity of his posture moments before, he adjusted the rifle so the strap loosened slightly in Andrew's grip. He didn't pull away. He didn't remove the hand. He let Andrew hold on. "Hello," Andrew said. The soldier's lips moved, almost imperceptibly. If you weren't standing within 3 feet, you wouldn't have caught it. But Andrew was standing within 3 feet. And Patricia, who had finally reached her son and was now standing right behind him with tears cutting lines down both cheeks, she caught it too. "Hello, mate." 2 words, barely a whisper, but they detonated like a bomb. The German tourist's camera was rolling. She would upload the footage to Facebook that evening, and within 12 hours it would have 4 million views. Within 48 hours, 22 million. Within a week, it would be covered by the BBC, Sky News, CNN, The Guardian, The Daily Mail, and every morning show on 3 continents. But in that moment, standing in front of Buckingham Palace, none of that mattered. What mattered was Andrew's face. The kid looked like he'd been handed the keys to heaven. His grip on the rifle strap loosened, and his hand moved from the strap to the soldier's sleeve. He touched the red fabric of the tunic with 2 fingers, gently, reverently, the way you'd touch something sacred. "You're real," Andrew said. "You're actually real." The soldier didn't respond verbally this time, but he did something else. His eyes glistened, just for a second, a flash of moisture that he blinked away with military efficiency. But it was there. Trust me, it was there. Patricia saw it. The German tourist's camera caught it, and Andrew, who never missed anything emotional even when he missed social cues, definitely saw it. "Are you sad?" Andrew asked. The soldier's jaw worked. A muscle in his cheek jumped. He swallowed once, hard, and then, still barely moving his lips, still staring straight ahead, he said, "No, mate, not anymore." Patricia put her hand on Andrew's shoulder. "We need to go now, love. We need to let the soldier do his job." Andrew looked up at the soldier one more time. "Thank you for protecting the Queen," he said. And then, because Andrew didn't understand half measures, because his heart operated at full throttle or not at all, he wrapped both arms around the soldier's waist and hugged him. Here's what you need to understand about this moment. A Queen's Guard on duty has not, in any publicly recorded instance in modern history, been hugged by a member of the public while on sentry duty. There is no protocol for it. There is no training scenario that covers it. There is nothing in the manual, nothing in the years of drill and discipline and tradition that tells a soldier what to do when a young man with Down syndrome wraps his arms around you and squeezes with every ounce of love in his body. The soldier stood there. The rifle was at his side. His arms were down. His posture was still technically at attention, but his head dipped. Just a fraction. His chin came down toward the top of Andrew's head, and his left hand, the one not holding the rifle, lifted about 2 inches from his side. That was it. 2 inches. He didn't complete the gesture. He didn't wrap his arm around Andrew, but he lifted that hand, just slightly, as if every synapse in his body was fighting a war between duty and humanity had gained exactly 2 inches of ground. The crowd had gone completely still. 40 people. Not a sound. Even the teenage boys who'd been smirking were standing slack-jawed. The German tourist's camera hand was shaking. A woman near the back of the group had her hand pressed against her mouth, tears running freely. An American man in a Yankees cap was filming on his phone, and his footage would later show that his hand was trembling so badly the video was almost unwatchable. It didn't matter. People watched it anyway. Millions of them. Andrew let go. He stepped back. He looked up at the soldier, pushed his glasses up his nose, and gave him that gap-toothed grin one final time. Then he turned to his mom, took her hand, and said, "Can we get chips now?" Patricia laughed. It came out broken and wet and beautiful. "Yes, love, we can get chips." She guided him back over the chain barrier. The crowd parted for them like they were royalty themselves. Several people reached out and patted Andrew on the shoulder or the back. An elderly British woman said, "Bless you, darling." Andrew waved at each of them, happy and oblivious to the fact that he'd just done something extraordinary. But the story doesn't end there, not even close. This is where it gets wild. The soldier's name was Guardsman James Radford, 24 years old. 2 tours in Afghanistan with the Coldstream Guards. He'd seen combat, he'd lost friends. He'd carried the kind of weight that most people can't even imagine. And he carried it silently, the way soldiers do, buried beneath discipline and duty and the daily grind of service. He'd been on guard duty outside Buckingham Palace for 3 months, And in that time, he'd dealt with hundreds of tourists, dozens of provocations, and more than a few situations that required a full challenge. He'd shouted. He'd stamped. He'd watched grown adults flinch and stumble backward. He'd done his job perfectly, every single time. Until Andrew. The footage hit the internet that evening. By midnight, it was everywhere. By the next morning, James Radford's commanding officer had seen it. And by noon, Radford was standing at attention in his CO's office, being told that a formal review of his conduct would be initiated. You heard me right. A formal review. Because what James Radford had done, smiling, speaking, allowing physical contact while on sentry duty, constituted a breach of standing orders. The Queen's Guard does not interact with the public. The Queen's Guard does not speak unless issuing a challenge. The Queen's Guard does not smile. And the Queen's Guard absolutely, categorically, does not allow a civilian to hug them. Radford stood in that office and took it. He didn't argue. He didn't make excuses. His CO, a lieutenant colonel named Davies, sat behind his desk and laid out the charges with bureaucratic precision. Failure to maintain bearing, failure to issue a challenge, failure to prevent unauthorized physical contact with military equipment, each one a mark on his record, each one a potential career ender. When Davies finished, he asked Radford if he had anything to say. Radford's answer was 5 words. "I'd do it again, sir." Davies stared at him for a long moment. Then he looked down at his desk, shuffled some papers, and said, "Dismissed, guardsman." Now here's what was happening outside that office. The video had gone thermonuclear. 22 million views in 48 hours, remember? Comment sections were flooded. People were calling Radford a hero. People were calling for anyone who disciplined him to be fired. A petition was started on change.org, demanding that no action be taken against the soldier. It gained 300,000 signatures in 3 days. Hashtags started trending. Bless the Guard, Soldier with a Heart, Protect Radford. News outlets picked it up. Military analysts were brought on television to discuss the protocol. Former guards weighed in. Some said he was right. Some said discipline must be maintained regardless of circumstances. The debate raged. And through all of it, Andrew had no idea. He was back in Manchester, eating chips and watching Changing of the Guard videos on YouTube, completely unaware that he'd become the most talked about person in Britain. Patricia knew, though. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since they got home. Friends, family, strangers who'd somehow found her number, reporters from every outlet imaginable. She didn't answer any of them. She sat in her kitchen and watched the video on her laptop and cried every single time the soldier's hand lifted those 2 inches from his side. 3 days after the incident, the Ministry of Defense released a statement. And this is the part that made me fall out of my chair. Sit down for this. The statement said that after a thorough review of the footage and circumstances, no disciplinary action would be taken against the guardsmen. The statement went on to say, and I'm paraphrasing only slightly here, that the soldier's conduct, while technically outside standard protocol, demonstrated exemplary judgment and compassion in an unprecedented situation, and that his actions reflected well on the values of the British Armed Forces. They praised him. The military, the institution built on rigid protocol and centuries of unbroken tradition, looked at what James Radford did and said, yeah, that was the right call. But wait, there's more. A week after the statement, Patricia received a letter at her home in Manchester. It was hand-delivered by a military courier. Inside was an invitation. Andrew was being invited to visit Wellington Barracks, the home base of the Coldstream Guards, for a private tour. Not a public event, not a PR stunt. A genuine, private invitation extended by the regiment to a young man who loved soldiers more than anything in the world. And here's the kicker. The invitation specified that Andrew's tour would be personally conducted by Guardsman James Radford. Patricia read the letter 3 times. Then she walked into Andrew's room, where he was arranging his toy soldiers on the windowsill, and she told him. Andrew's reaction nearly brought the walls down. He shouted so loud the neighbor knocked on the door to check if everything was all right. He ran around the flat with his arms spread wide, making sounds that Patricia later described as somewhere between a jet engine and pure joy. He didn't sleep that night, not a single minute. The visit happened 2 weeks later. Patricia drove Andrew to London, and when they pulled up to Wellington Barracks, James Radford was standing at the gate, out of the bearskin hat, out of the red tunic, in his regular uniform. And for the first time, Andrew saw him as a person, not a statue, shorter than he'd seemed at the palace, younger, a scar above his left eyebrow from a piece of shrapnel in Helmand Province, blue eyes that crinkled when he saw Andrew pile out of the car. Andrew ran at him, Full sprint, arms wide, and this time, there was no sentry box, no rifle, no protocol, no chain barrier, and no internal war between duty and humanity. Radford dropped to one knee and caught Andrew in a full embrace, held him for 10 seconds. 15. Patricia stood by the car and let the tears fall and didn't try to hide them. Now mark my words. What happened during that tour would cement this story as something permanent, something beyond a viral moment. Radford walked Andrew through the barracks for 3 hours. He showed him the armory. He let Andrew try on a bearskin hat, which immediately slid down over the kid's eyes, and Andrew laughed so hard he had to sit down on the floor. Radford showed him the parade ground where they practiced drill. He introduced Andrew to other soldiers, and each one shook his hand and treated him with genuine respect and warmth. Andrew asked 1,000 questions, and Radford answered every single one with patience and detail that would have impressed a university lecturer. But there was one moment during the tour that broke everything wide open. They were standing in the Regimental Museum, a room full of medals and flags and photographs going back to the English Civil War. Andrew was looking at a display case containing medals from the Second World War when he turned to Radford and asked a question that sucked the air out of the room. "James, do you ever get scared?" Radford's face changed. The easy warmth he'd been showing all morning didn't disappear, but something shifted beneath it. His shoulders dropped half an inch. His hand went to the back of his neck and stayed there. "Yeah, mate," he said. "I get scared." Andrew frowned. "But you're a soldier." Radford crouched down to Andrew's eye level. "Being a soldier doesn't mean you don't get scared. It means you stand there anyway." Andrew thought about this. You could see him processing it, working through it with that beautiful, earnest mind. Then he said, "I get scared too. People stare at me. They think I don't understand things." Radford put his hand on Andrew's shoulder. "Mate, you understand more than most people I've ever met." Andrew's face split into that gap-toothed grin. "Can I try on the hat again?" Radford laughed. A real laugh, loud and surprised and honest. "Yeah, come on." Patricia stood in the doorway of the museum and watched her son walk away with a soldier's arm around his shoulder, chattering about plume colors and button spacing. And she understood something. She understood that what had happened at the palace wasn't an accident. It wasn't a fluke or a viral moment or a lucky break. It was what happens when two people, stripped of pretense, meet each other exactly where they are. Andrew didn't see a soldier bound by protocol. He saw a person. And Radford, in the space of a heartbeat, chose to see Andrew the same way. Not a disruption, not a threat, not a special needs case requiring careful handling. A person. A human being standing in front of him with nothing but honesty and admiration. That choice, that tiny, massive 2-inch choice, changed both their lives. After the tour, Radford and Andrew stayed in contact. Patricia set up a video call once a month, and Andrew would show Radford his latest toy soldier acquisitions, while Radford showed Andrew whatever base or barracks he was stationed at. When Andrew turned 23, Radford sent him a birthday card with a regimental pin inside. Andrew pinned it to his jacket and wore it every single day. When Radford's unit deployed for a training exercise in Kenya, he sent Andrew a postcard with a photo of a giraffe. Andrew taped it to his bedroom wall next to his soldier lineup. And here's where I need you to hear me. This wasn't charity. This wasn't a soldier tolerating a fan. This was a friendship, a real one, built on something that most adults spend their entire lives trying to find and failing: mutual respect without conditions. The video, meanwhile, continued its journey through the internet. It was translated into 30 languages. It was used in military training seminars in 4 countries as an example of what the instructors called adaptive leadership. It was shown in schools. It was cited in academic papers about disability rights and public perception. It was played at a UN conference on inclusivity. It was shared by celebrities, politicians, athletes, and ordinary people in every corner of the world. James Radford never did a single interview, not one. He was offered spots on morning shows, asked to appear at charity events, contacted by publishers wanting to ghostwrite his story. He turned down everything. When a reporter finally cornered him outside the barracks and asked why he wouldn't talk about it, Radford said 7 words that hit harder than any speech. "It wasn't about me. It was about him." Let me tell you what happened to Andrew after that. He became an advocate, not in any formal, organized way. Andrew didn't give speeches or write op-eds. He just kept being Andrew. He visited schools and talked to kids about what it was like to have Down syndrome. He told them about his soldiers. He told them about James. He told them that if a Queen's Guard could smile for him, then anyone could smile for anyone, and the world would be a lot better if people just tried. He was right. You know he was right. We all know he was right. And yet somehow it took a 22-year-old kid with big glasses and a gap-toothed grin to remind us. Patricia started a small blog documenting Andrew's adventures. She wrote about the palace visit, the barracks tour, the friendship with Radford. The blog gained a following, not a massive one, enough that other parents of children with Down syndrome found it and wrote to Patricia and told her that Andrew's story had changed how they talked to their kids about the world. Enough that a teacher in Birmingham used the video in a lesson about empathy and told Patricia that a kid who'd been bullying a classmate with Down syndrome watched it, went quiet, and apologized the next day. Enough that when Andrew walked down the street in Manchester, occasionally someone would recognize him and say hello. And Andrew would wave and grin and say, "I met a real soldier," with the same wonder he'd felt that first day. This is real. Every word. And if this story moved you, if Andrew and James reminded you that the world still has moments of genuine, uncomplicated good, then hit that subscribe button and the bell right now, because this channel finds these stories. We dig them up, dust them off, and make sure they don't disappear. 2 years after the palace incident, something happened that nobody expected. The Coldstream Guards were preparing for the annual Trooping the Color, the grand military parade held in honor of the monarch's birthday. It's one of the most prestigious events on the military calendar. Thousands of soldiers, millions of viewers worldwide, precision, pageantry, and tradition at its most magnificent. Andrew received an invitation, not to watch from the crowd, to sit in the stands. The actual very important person stands reserved for military families, dignitaries, and honored guests. The invitation came from the regiment itself, signed by the commanding officer. Andrew was listed as a friend of the regiment, an honorary designation that had been given to very few civilians in the unit's long history. Andrew wore his best jacket, the one with Radford's regimental pin on the lapel. Patricia pressed his trousers and combed his hair and took 14 photographs before they left the house. When they arrived at Horse Guards Parade, they were escorted to their seats by a young corporal who called Andrew sir and meant it. The parade began. Hundreds of soldiers in perfect formation, music from the massed bands, flags snapping in the June breeze, and there, marching with the Coldstream Guards, was James Radford, back straight, rifle at the shoulder, bearskin hat tall and black against the sky, the consummate soldier, the picture of discipline and tradition. As the Coldstream Guards passed the very important person stands, something happened that veterans of the parade said they had never witnessed before. Radford's head turned, slightly, almost imperceptibly. His eyes found Andrew in the stands, and Andrew, who was already on his feet, who had been on his feet since the first drumbeat, was waving with both arms above his head, his face a supernova of pride and joy. Radford's chin dipped, one nod, brief and precise, and then he faced forward and marched on. Andrew turned to his mum. His glasses were fogged up, his cheeks were wet, and he said, in a voice so calm and certain that Patricia felt it in her bones, "He's my friend." That's it. That's the line. 5 words. No explanation needed, no elaboration, no follow-up. Just a young man stating a fact about the world as he understood it, and the world, for once, being exactly what he believed it to be. I want to tell you one more thing. One last piece of this that ties it all together. 3 years after the palace incident, James Radford completed his service with the Coldstream Guards. He left the military with an exemplary record, a handful of commendations, and a story that would follow him for the rest of his life. He could have disappeared into civilian life. Many soldiers do. They put the uniform away and try to become someone new. Radford didn't disappear. He went into youth work. Specifically, he started working with young people with learning disabilities, helping them build confidence, develop life skills, and find their place in a world that too often made them feel like they didn't have one. When a newspaper reporter finally got him to say a few words about his new career, Radford said, "A kid taught me what my uniform was actually for. It wasn't for standing still. It was for showing up." He still calls Andrew once a month. Andrew still shows him his toy soldiers. Radford still watches and asks questions like each one matters. Because they do. Think about this. Think about what actually happened that day at Buckingham Palace. A young man with Down syndrome crossed a chain barrier and grabbed a soldier's rifle strap. Every rule, every protocol, every century of tradition said the response should be swift, loud, and absolute. And in the time it takes a heart to beat once, A 24-year-old guardsman looked at the situation, looked at the person in front of him, and chose humanity over procedure. That choice cost him nothing in the end. No disciplinary action, no career damage, no repercussions. But he didn't know that when he made it. When James Radford decided to smile instead of shout, he believed he was risking everything, and he did it anyway. That's the story. A soldier who chose to see a person. A young man who never learned to hide what he felt. A mother who saved for 14 months to make her son's dream come true. And a moment, 90 seconds long, captured on a tourist's shaking camera that reminded millions of people what courage actually looks like. It doesn't look like a soldier standing rigid and shouting at a civilian. It doesn't look like following orders without question. It doesn't look like centuries of tradition upheld for tradition's sake. It looks like 2 inches, a hand lifting from a side, a smile breaking through stone, a whispered hello, a choice to be human when every rule says don't. Andrew never stopped talking about soldiers. He never stopped watching the changing of the guard on YouTube. He never stopped lining up his toy soldiers on the windowsill. But after that day, after that 90-second moment at the palace gates, he added something to his nightly routine. Every night, before bed, he'd look at the postcard from Kenya and the regimental pin on his jacket, and he'd say, "Good night, James." And somewhere, wherever Radford was, whatever he was doing, I believe he felt it. Not because of anything mystical or magical, but because some connections, the real ones, the ones forged in moments of pure truth, don't need proximity to survive. A kid grabbed a soldier's rifle strap. The soldier could have done what every rule demanded. He chose to be kind instead. And that choice became legend. A legend whispered about for decades, shared across the world, carried in the heart of a young man from Manchester who just wanted to know if the soldiers were real. They were, and so was he.